The screech of brakes pierced the Tuesday evening air like a wounded animal's cry. Glass exploded around us as the drunk driver's black SUV slammed into our blue sedan at 40 miles per hour. Tyler's scream from the back seat cut through my soul deeper than any physical pain ever could. We'd been driving home from his soccer practice discussing his upcoming math test and weekend plans when life changed forever in 3 seconds of twisted metal and terror. As paramedics worked frantically on Tyler's obviously broken arm and checked my throbbing head for concussion symptoms, I fumbled for my phone with shaking fingers. Blood trickled down my forehead as I typed desperately into our family group chat. "We're in the hospital. Alive, but shaken." Then I waited for the flood of concerned responses that would surely come from the 12 people who claimed to love us most. The antiseptic smell of Sacred Heart Children's Hospital became my new reality as I spent that first endless night in the pediatric ward beside Tyler's narrow bed. His right arm sat encased in a temporary splint, purple bruises blooming across his pale skin like dark flowers. Every hour brought a new nurse checking vitals, adjusting his IV drip, or asking about his pain level on that cartoon scale with the crying and smiling faces. My own head felt like someone was driving railroad spikes through my skull. The concussion making bright lights feel like laser beams boring into my brain. I checked my phone obsessively throughout those dark hours, watching the little read indicators appear beneath my desperate message. Mom had seen it at 8:47 p.m. My brother James opened it at 9:15. Sister Patricia read it before 10 o'clock. By midnight, all 12 family members had viewed my cry for help, yet my notification screen remained cruelly blank. Tyler stirred around 6 a.m., his green eyes fluttering open as morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds. "Dad, where is everyone? Why didn't Grandma come?" His voice carried that fragile quality children get when they're scared and trying to be brave. "They're probably just worried and don't know what to say, buddy. Sometimes adults get tongue-tied when they're frightened." The lie tasted bitter, but I couldn't burden an 11-year-old with the truth I was slowly accepting. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach plummet. Instagram story from my sister-in-law, Melissa James's wife. The video showed an elaborate brunch setup with white linens, crystal champagne flutes, and a 3-tiered cake decorated with 15 glittering candles. My niece Sarah, beaming in a flowing pink dress posed with extended family members, I recognized immediately. There was my mother Karen, wearing the pearl necklace I'd given her last Christmas, raising a mimosa in celebration. My father Robert stood behind her, his arm around my Uncle Frank, both laughing heartily at something off-camera. The next story showed James himself, my older brother, who hadn't responded to my hospital message, making an elaborate toast with a crystal glass held high. Patricia appeared in the background, her auburn hair perfectly styled, wearing the emerald earrings I'd helped her pick out for her birthday. Cousin Derek and his wife posed with party favors, their twin daughters wearing matching purple dresses and tiaras. Every single person who had ignored my desperate plea for support was there, dressed in their Sunday finest, celebrating Sarah's 15th birthday, with champagne and laughter, while Tyler and I sat alone in a sterile hospital room, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed through the endless hours. The images kept coming throughout the afternoon. Group photos on the restaurant patio, selfies with the birthday girl, videos of Sarah opening presents, while everyone cheered. A panoramic shot revealed at least 20 family members gathered around tables laden with gourmet food and floral centerpieces. The party had clearly been planned for weeks, possibly months. "Dad, your phone keeps buzzing. Is it the family?" Tyler asked hopefully, his young face brightening with anticipation. I silenced the device and forced a smile. "Just some work stuff, son. Nothing important right now." But the cruel truth was becoming impossible to ignore. These weren't people who had forgotten about our accident, or were too overwhelmed to respond. They were actively choosing celebration over crisis champagne, over compassion. While Tyler fought pain and fear in a hospital bed, they posed for photographs and laughed at birthday jokes. The message was clear: Our tragedy simply didn't matter enough to interrupt their scheduled joy. As evening fell, and Tyler drifted into an uneasy sleep medication, finally dulling his discomfort, I sat in the visitor's chair, staring at my silent phone. The group chat that usually buzzed with constant family updates, weekend plans, and shared photographs had gone dead the moment I needed it most. 12 people who claimed to love us had collectively decided that a child's broken bones and his father's head injury weren't worth acknowledging, let alone addressing. The nurse who came for Tyler's evening medication check, a kind woman named Linda with graying hair and gentle hands, noticed my expression. "Rough day for family visits?" she asked softly. "Something like that." I managed, unable to explain, that there had been no visits at all, that we were facing this crisis completely alone, despite having what everyone always called a close-knit family. "Well, the important thing is, you're here for him," she said, adjusting Tyler's blanket with practiced care. "Children heal faster when they feel safe and loved. Everything else is just noise." If only she knew how much noise had gone completely silent, leaving us stranded in a sterile world of beeping monitors and medical procedures, wondering why the people who should have dropped everything to be here had chosen birthday cake instead. Tyler's surgery was scheduled for Thursday morning to properly set the fractured radius and align the bone fragments that had shifted during our accident. As they wheeled him into the operating room at 7 a.m., his brave smile nearly broke my heart. "See you when I wake up, Dad. Will anyone else be here by then?" "We'll see, buddy. The doctors say this will fix your arm completely." I squeezed his uninjured hand, avoiding his question because I couldn't bear to dash his hopes again. The family waiting lounge felt cavernous and cold as I settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair for what the orthopedic surgeon warned could be a 3-hour procedure. My concussion still made focusing difficult, and the harsh fluorescent lights triggered waves of nausea that had me gripping the armrests until my knuckles went white. Around 10:30, a woman in designer yoga clothes took the seat 2 chairs away from me, immediately launching into a loud phone conversation that echoed through the nearly empty space. "I'm telling you, Sandra, the whole family's worked up about this situation," she announced, gesturing dramatically with her free hand. "Nobody knows what to say anymore." I tried to ignore her, focusing instead on the surgery updates board, where Tyler's case number glowed in yellow, indicating the procedure was still ongoing. But her voice carried that particular quality of someone who enjoys being the center of dramatic stories. "The thing is, Derek says everyone's just furious about how selfish Matthew's been lately. I mean, leaving poor Jennifer after 8 years of marriage, for what, some midlife crisis nonsense about finding himself or whatever." She laughed harshly, the sound grating against my already frayed nerves. My blood went cold as I realized she was talking about me. This was Derek's wife, my cousin's spouse, discussing my personal life with someone, while I sat 3 feet away, unrecognized in my rumpled clothes and bandaged forehead. "Oh, honey, you should have heard Karen at the emergency family meeting 3 weeks ago. She was absolutely beside herself, saying how Matthew thinks he knows better than everyone else and doesn't need family advice anymore." Robert was furious too, going on about how divorce destroys children and how Matthew's being completely irresponsible. The words hit me like physical blows. An emergency family meeting 3 weeks ago. About my divorce, I'd ended my marriage to Jennifer 4 months earlier, after years of growing apart, after countless attempts at counseling. After we both finally admitted we'd become strangers living in the same house. It had been painful, but mutual, handled as gently as possible for Tyler's sake. Karen actually said they should give him the silent treatment until he comes to his senses and realizes how much he needs the family support. She said, "Let him figure things out alone, since he thinks he knows better than people who've been married for 30 years. Derek's wife continued, completely oblivious to my presence. The waiting room began to spin as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. This wasn't neglect born from shock or confusion about how to respond to our crisis. This was deliberate punishment, carefully orchestrated and collectively agreed upon by the very people who should have been rushing to Tyler's bedside. And Robert, Oh my God. Robert actually said the accident might be a blessing in disguise, like a wake-up call to show Matthew what happens when you push family away. He said maybe now he'll realize how much he needs Jennifer back in his life. My hands clenched into fists as rage and disbelief warred in my chest. They were using Tyler's broken arm and my head injury as a teaching moment to punish me for making an adult decision about my own marriage. A car accident that could have killed us both had become, in their twisted logic, a useful tool for family manipulation. The whole plan is to just keep ignoring him until he gets desperate enough to apologize and ask Jennifer to take him back. Derek says it shouldn't take long since he's got that big ego, but he's always been a mama's boy deep down. The surgery board blinked, showing Tyler's procedure had moved into the recovery phase. Soon, he'd be waking up groggy and scared, looking for familiar faces to comfort him. Instead, he'd find only me, his father, who had apparently been deemed unworthy of basic human compassion by 12 people who claimed to love him unconditionally. Derek's wife finally ended her call and noticed me staring at her, my face undoubtedly showing the shock and fury coursing through my veins. For a moment, recognition flickered in her eyes, followed immediately by embarrassment and panic. Oh no, Matthew, she stammered, gathering her purse and phone with shaking hands. Thank you for the clarification, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I was wondering why my injured son hadn't received a single call or visit from his grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins. Now I understand perfectly. She fled the waiting area without another word, leaving me alone with the devastating truth. My family hadn't abandoned us out of awkwardness or fear. They'd made a calculated decision to weaponize our tragedy, gambling that Tyler's pain and my desperation would force me back into a marriage I'd escaped for my own mental health and my son's well-being. When Tyler emerged from surgery 2 hours later, still groggy from anesthesia, but smiling bravely through his discomfort, I held his hand and promised myself that regardless of what came next, he would never again be used as a pawn in anyone else's emotional games. Friday evening brought the kind of medical emergency that turns ordinary hospital rooms into war zones. Tyler had been recovering beautifully from his arm surgery, chatting with nurses about his soccer team, and asking when he could return to school when everything changed in a matter of minutes. It started with him complaining that he felt really hot and weird around 8 p.m. Within 30 minutes, his temperature had spiked to 106 degrees, his muscles had become rigid as stone, and his heart rate was climbing toward dangerous levels. The pediatric team descended on us like a SWAT unit, shouting medical terminology I didn't understand while wheeling an equipment that looked like something from a space station. Malignant hyperthermia, Dr. Elizabeth Chen announced grimly after examining Tyler's symptoms. It's a rare, but potentially fatal reaction to the anesthesia from yesterday's surgery. We're moving him to intensive care immediately. The next several hours blurred into a nightmare of consent forms, treatment protocols, and medical procedures that required more signatures than buying a house. Tyler was connected to a ventilator to help him breathe, while cooling blankets brought his body temperature down degree by agonizing degree. Monitors tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every fluctuation in his blood pressure with electronic precision. The pediatric ICU operated under strict family rotation policies because of the intensive monitoring required. Someone needed to be present at all times in case Tyler's condition changed, but the medical staff recommended that relatives take shifts to prevent caregiver burnout during what could be days or weeks of critical care. I called my mother's number at 2 a.m., my hands shaking as I listened to her voicemail greeting play for the 4th time that night. Mom, Tyler's in intensive care with complications from his surgery. He might not make it. Please call me back immediately. James's phone went straight to voicemail without even ringing. Patricia's number produced the same automated message about being unable to take my call. I sent text messages with photographs of Tyler connected to machines, his small body surrounded by wires and tubes, his face pale as winter snow against the hospital pillows. My phone remained silent. Saturday morning brought no improvement in Tyler's condition, and no contact from anyone in my family. Dr. Chen explained that the next 48 hours would determine whether the treatments were working, or if Tyler's organs would begin shutting down from the stress his body had endured. "Is there anyone else we should contact?" she asked gently, noticing that Tyler's medical forms listed multiple emergency contacts who had never appeared or called. Grandparents, siblings, close family friends. Critical cases like this are easier on everyone when there's a support system in place. I explained about the family situation as diplomatically as possible, watching her professional expression shift from confusion to something approaching alarm. In 15 years of pediatric intensive care, I've never seen a child face a crisis this serious with only one family member present. She said carefully, "Are you certain there isn't some miscommunication? Perhaps they don't understand the severity." By Sunday afternoon, Tyler's condition had stabilized enough to move him out of immediate danger, though he remained unconscious and connected to multiple monitoring systems. I hadn't left the hospital in 72 hours, surviving on cafeteria coffee and vending machine sandwiches, while maintaining a constant vigil beside his bed. Amanda, the night shift nurse, who had been particularly kind throughout this ordeal, found me staring out the ICU window at the parking lot 6 stories below. "When's the last time you ate a real meal, or slept for more than 20 minutes?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen too many parents collapse from exhaustion. "I can't leave him alone," I said, watching Tyler's chest rise and fall with mechanical assistance. "What if something happens and nobody's here?" "That's what the other family members are for," she replied gently. "Even if they take 4-hour shifts, you could get some actual rest and come back stronger for him." I showed her my phone, scrolling through the dozens of unanswered calls and ignored text messages, including the photos of Tyler on life support that had generated no responses whatsoever. Her face went through a series of expressions I'd seen before: disbelief, confusion, and finally, a kind of professional outrage. This child's grandparents haven't even called to check on his condition. His aunts and uncles know he's fighting for his life, and they're just not coming. She looked from my phone to Tyler's unconscious form, then back at me with something like amazement. What kind of people turn their backs on a child in intensive care? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. What kind of people indeed? The kind who would sacrifice a child's well-being to make a point about divorce. The kind who believed that family loyalty meant unconditional obedience to their opinions and decisions. The kind who saw Tyler's medical crisis as collateral damage in their war to control my personal choices. The kind who think they're teaching me a lesson. I said, finally, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Amanda stood quietly for a long moment, processing this information. "Well, they're teaching you something, all right," she said eventually. "Just probably not what they intended." As Tyler entered his 4th day in the ICU, still unconscious, but showing signs of neurological improvement, I realized she was absolutely right. This crisis was indeed educational, but the lesson had nothing to do with the value of family and everything to do with learning who deserved to be called family in the first place. Tuesday morning found me face down on the hospital cafeteria floor, between a Pepsi machine and a rack of stale sandwiches, surrounded by concerned voices and the distant wail of medical alarms. The last thing I remembered clearly was standing in line for coffee, watching the numbers on my debit card decline, because I'd been buying overpriced hospital food for 6 days straight, when the world suddenly tilted sideways and went black. "Sir, can you hear me? Don't try to move just yet." The voice belonged to a security guard whose name tag read Carlos, and whose weathered face suggested he'd seen plenty of family members hit their breaking point in this sterile building. Dr. Martinez, the emergency physician who examined me after Carlos and his team transported me to the ED, delivered a diagnosis that should have been obvious days earlier. Severe dehydration, concussion complications, and what I'd clinically describe as complete physical and emotional exhaustion. He explained while adjusting my IV line. When's the last time you slept for more than 2 hours consecutively? I couldn't answer because I genuinely didn't remember. The days had blended into an endless cycle of Tyler's medical updates, machine monitoring, and futile attempts to contact family members who had apparently written us both off completely. "Your friend is here," a nurse announced around noon, and I assumed she meant one of the hospital staff who'd been particularly kind. Instead, Marcus Williams walked through the door, carrying a duffel bag, and wearing the expression of someone who'd been driving for hours without stopping. Marcus and I had been friends since college, staying close through marriages, career changes, and all the normal chaos of adult life. He worked as a financial advisor in Portland, 3 hours south, and I hadn't spoken to him in several weeks. Yet somehow he'd heard about our situation and dropped everything to make the trip north. "Amy got a call from her hairdresser yesterday," he explained, settling into the visitor's chair beside my hospital bed. "Apparently, the gossip network in this town moves faster than your family's support system. Amy was his wife, and her hairdresser was notorious for knowing everyone's business before they knew it themselves. In a city of only 40,000 people, major events like car accidents and family drama traveled through certain social circles with surprising speed. The whole salon was talking about how the Morrison family is giving you the cold shoulder, while Tyler's in intensive care. Amy couldn't believe it, so she called your sister-in-law's best friend to get the real story." Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through several text message screenshots. "What she learned is going to make you furious, but you need to hear it." The story he revealed was even more twisted than I'd imagined from Derek's wife's overheard phone conversation. Jennifer's father, Robert Castellanos, owned Castellanos Construction, the largest building contractor in our region. For the past 8 years, he'd been employing my brother James as a project manager, with a salary nearly double what comparable positions paid elsewhere. My father worked as a consultant for the company, essentially a retirement job that provided full benefits and a comfortable income for minimal responsibilities. But here's where it gets complicated. Marcus continued showing me financial records that Amy had somehow obtained through her network of well-connected friends. Jennifer's mother, Diana, owns 3 high-end interior design boutiques. Patricia has been the lead designer for the flagship location for the past 5 years, pulling in commissions that have basically funded her entire lifestyle. The vacation home in Lake Tahoe, where our extended family spent every summer, owned by the Castellanos family, provided rent-free as long as James and Patricia maintained their employment relationships. The new trucks my father and James drove, company vehicles from Robert's fleet. Even my mother's part-time bookkeeping job, contracted through Diana's design business. "When you filed for divorce 4 months ago, Robert went ballistic." Marcus explained, his voice dropping to the serious tone he used when discussing clients' financial disasters. "Amy's friend works in their accounting department, and she said Robert called an emergency meeting with his management team specifically to discuss the Matthew problem. According to the inside information Marcus had gathered, Robert had issued an ultimatum to my family, convince me to reconcile with Jennifer within 6 months, or face immediate termination and eviction from company-owned properties. Diana had made similar threats regarding Patricia's lucrative design position. "Your mother called Amy's friend 3 weeks ago absolutely hysterical," Marcus continued. "She said they'd tried talking to you about the divorce, but you weren't listening to family wisdom anymore. So they decided to implement what she called tough love, until you came to your senses. The tough love strategy involved complete social isolation, until I became desperate enough to beg for their support, and by extension agree to whatever reconciliation terms Jennifer and her family demanded. The car accident, from their perspective, was simply fortuitous timing that would accelerate my emotional breakdown and willingness to compromise. Karen actually told people that losing family support during a crisis would teach you how much you need them in your life." Marcus said, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "She said once you realized you couldn't handle single parenthood alone, you'd appreciate what Jennifer brought to the marriage." The IV drip in my arm felt cold as ice as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. This wasn't family dysfunction, or poor communication, or even misguided concern for my well-being. This was calculated financial manipulation, disguised as moral guidance with Tyler's medical crisis, serving as leverage to force me back into a marriage that had been emotionally dead for years. "There's more," Marcus said grimly, pulling up another set of documents on his phone. "Robert's been planning this for months. He actually increased James's salary and Patricia's commission structure right after you filed divorce papers, making them even more financially dependent on staying in his good graces. My family had been bought plain and simple. Their loyalty, their support, their love for their grandson and nephew had all been sacrificed for job security and financial comfort. While Tyler fought for his life in intensive care, they were protecting their paychecks and vacation home access by maintaining the silence that Robert's family demanded. The question now," Marcus said, closing his phone and looking directly at me, "is what you're going to do with this information." As I lay in that hospital bed, still weak from dehydration and exhaustion, watching Marcus's concerned face blur slightly from lingering concussion effects, I realized the answer was already forming in my mind. For 6 days, I'd been confused and heartbroken by my family's abandonment. Now I understood it was simply business, and business required a different kind of response than broken-hearted pleading ever could. Tyler finally opened his eyes. Wednesday afternoon, his fever broken, and his vital signs stable enough for the medical team to begin discussing discharge planning. The relief I felt watching him smile weakly and ask for water was indescribable, like surfacing from deep water after nearly drowning. For the first time in a week, I could imagine a future beyond hospital walls and machine monitoring. "Dad, I had the weirdest dreams," he said, his voice hoarse from the ventilator tube that had been removed that morning. "Everyone was there, except they weren't really there, you know. Like they were behind glass or something. You've been very sick, buddy. Sometimes medications can make our brains play tricks on us." I helped him sip water through a bent straw, marveling at how such a simple action could feel like witnessing a miracle. By Thursday evening, Tyler was sitting up in bed eating solid food and asking when we could go home. The doctors were optimistic about a weekend discharge if his recovery continued progressing smoothly. I was finally allowing myself to believe we'd survived this nightmare when my phone exploded with activity that had nothing to do with our medical situation. The first call came at 7:23 p.m. from my father's number. Then James. Then Patricia. Then my mother. By 8 o'clock, I had 39 missed calls from various family members, all within a 90-minute window after a week of complete silence. The voicemails they left sounded panicked, desperate, and completely different from the calculated coldness I'd grown accustomed to. "Matthew, call me back immediately. We have a family emergency and need you to answer your phone right now." My father's voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before, something approaching genuine fear. "Son, please pick up. There's been a development with Tyler's situation that requires immediate attention. This is urgent." James sounded like he was reading from a script, his usual confidence replaced by obvious stress. But it was my mother's message that finally convinced me to return their calls. "Matthew, honey, please don't ignore us now. Robert Castellanos had a massive heart attack this afternoon. He's in surgery, and things don't look good. We need to discuss Tyler's medical insurance situation immediately." When I called back, Karen answered before the first ring finished. "Oh, thank God, Matthew. Where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for hours." The irony of her complaint wasn't lost on me, but I kept my voice level. "I've been exactly where I've been for the past week, Mom. In the hospital with Tyler." "What's this about Robert having a heart attack?" "He collapsed during a board meeting this afternoon. They think it's stress-related, possibly connected to some problems with his business." Her voice broke slightly. "But that's not the immediate issue we need to address." The immediate issue, she explained through barely controlled hysteria, was Tyler's medical insurance coverage. When Jennifer and I divorced, we'd maintained joint custody with her, carrying Tyler on her employer-provided health plan through Robert's company. The coverage was excellent, covering specialist care, emergency procedures, and the kind of intensive treatment Tyler had required over the past week. The problem is that Jennifer's been unreachable for 3 days, Karen continued. She's been on some business trip in Japan, and the hospital needs updated insurance authorization for Tyler's continued treatment and discharge planning. This explanation already felt wrong, but I let her continue while I processed the implications. If Robert dies or becomes incapacitated, there could be immediate changes to the company's benefit structure. The hospital's billing department is concerned about coverage continuity, and they need someone with legal authority to authorize Tyler's care going forward. James took over the call, his project manager voice, attempting to sound calm and professional. The legal department at Robert's company has prepared emergency custody documents that would give Mom and Dad temporary guardianship over Tyler's medical decisions. It's just a precaution to ensure his treatment isn't interrupted while we sort out the insurance complications. You want me to sign documents giving you custody of my son? I asked, making sure I understood their request correctly. Temporary medical custody. Patricia clarified, apparently listening on another extension. Just until the insurance situation stabilizes and Jennifer gets back from her trip. It's purely administrative, nothing that affects your parental rights long term. The pressure in their voices was unmistakable. After a week of treating Tyler and me like we didn't exist, they suddenly needed my immediate cooperation to sign legal documents that would transfer decision-making authority for my son's care to people who had abandoned him during the worst crisis of his young life. What happens if I don't sign these documents? I asked. The silence on the line stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, my father's voice returned, sounding older and more fragile than I'd ever heard it. The hospital's financial counselor explained that if Robert's condition deteriorates, Tyler's current insurance coverage could be terminated retroactively. The medical bills from the past week alone are approaching $60,000. And if the insurance becomes invalid, the hospital could potentially pursue collection against Tyler's custodial parent, James added. The legal documents would transfer that financial responsibility to Mom and Dad, who could then work with Robert's family to maintain coverage through their private medical network. So there, it was finally stated clearly. After a week of silence designed to break my spirit and force reconciliation with Jennifer, they now needed my signature to protect themselves from financial consequences while maintaining their employment relationships with Robert's family. They were asking me to surrender legal authority over my son's medical care to people who had proven they valued money over his well-being. I need time to think about this, I said. There isn't time. My mother interrupted, her voice rising toward panic. The hospital needs these documents first thing Friday morning, and Robert's condition is deteriorating. If we wait too long, the insurance could lapse and leave Tyler without coverage for ongoing care. Then, I guess you should have thought about that before ignoring us for a week. I replied, ending the call before anyone could respond. Tyler looked up from the comic book a nurse had brought him, noticing my expression. Was that the family? Are they coming to visit now? We'll see, buddy, I said, sitting down beside his bed and taking his uninjured hand in mine. But whatever happens, we're going to be just fine. For the first time since this nightmare began, I actually believed that was true. Friday morning brought James to Tyler's hospital room, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing his most serious business expression. Tyler was scheduled for final X-rays before discharge, giving us privacy to discuss what James called the family situation that requires immediate resolution. I brought the temporary custody documents for you to review, he said, spreading legal papers across the rolling table, typically used for Tyler's meal trays. The hospital's legal department has expedited the process, so we can have everything filed before the insurance coverage potentially lapses. I pretended to read through the documents while actually studying James's demeanor. My brother had always been confident to the point of arrogance, the family member who solved problems through force of personality and professional connections. Today, he seemed nervous, checking his watch repeatedly and glancing toward the door as if expecting interruption. This seems pretty comprehensive for temporary medical custody. I observed noting clauses about educational decisions, residential arrangements, and financial responsibility that extended far beyond Tyler's immediate medical needs. Robert's lawyers wanted to be thorough. James explained, his voice carrying a slight tremor. Given the complexity of the insurance situation and Jennifer's continued absence, they felt it was important to cover all potential scenarios. Jennifer's absence, I repeated slowly. James, exactly. When did she leave for this business trip to Japan? I'm not sure of the exact date. You'd have to ask Mom or Dad for those details. He avoided eye contact while speaking, focusing instead on organizing the papers in order of signature requirements. And you haven't spoken to her directly about Tyler's condition or the insurance complications? Well, no, but Jennifer's lawyer has been in contact with our legal team about the custodial transfer process. The words came out quickly, almost carelessly, and James immediately realized his mistake. Jennifer's lawyer, I asked, setting down the custody documents. Why would Jennifer need a lawyer for a temporary medical custody arrangement if she's simply unreachable in Japan? James's face went pale as he processed what he'd accidentally revealed. For several seconds he said nothing, apparently weighing his options between continued deception and damage control through partial truth. Look, Matthew, the situation is more complicated than we initially explained. He began, his professional mask slipping to reveal genuine distress underneath. Jennifer has been working with Robert's legal team since the accident happened. The Japan trip was, well, it wasn't exactly a business trip. The truth, when it finally came out, was even more twisted than anything Marcus had uncovered through his network of contacts. Jennifer had never left for Japan. She'd been staying at our parents' house since the day after our accident, working with Robert's attorneys to use Tyler's medical crisis as leverage for a reconciliation that would benefit everyone except Tyler and me. The original plan was for the family to maintain silence until you became desperate enough to accept help from anyone, including Jennifer. James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Then, she was going to appear at the hospital as the concerned ex-wife, offering to handle all the medical decisions and insurance complications if you agreed to marriage counseling and moving back home. You mean the plan was to exploit my son's injuries, to manipulate me into an unwanted reconciliation? It wasn't supposed to go this far, he protested. Nobody expected Tyler to develop complications or end up in intensive care. The idea was just to let you struggle with the basic medical decisions for a day or two before Jennifer stepped in as the solution to your problems. The phone calls had started yesterday because Robert's heart attack disrupted their carefully orchestrated timeline. Without Robert's continued employment guarantees and benefit coverage, they needed emergency custody documents signed immediately to transfer Tyler into Jennifer's legal control, regardless of whether their manipulation scheme had succeeded. Jennifer told the whole family that if we helped orchestrate this reconciliation, Robert would not only maintain everyone's employment, but actually expand our roles within his company. James continued, his confession gaining momentum like a runaway train. He promised to promote me to regional manager and give Patricia her own design firm franchise. Mom and Dad would get permanent positions with full retirement benefits. So, you bet Tyler's well-being against career advancement and vacation home access. She said you'd thank us eventually for helping you realize that divorce was a mistake and that Tyler needed a stable, two-parent household, James said desperately. Jennifer convinced everyone that you were just going through a phase and that family pressure during a crisis would help you see clearly again. By abandoning Tyler in intensive care. We didn't know he'd get that sick. Nobody planned for complications. James gathered the custody documents with shaking hands, apparently realizing that his confession had eliminated any chance of my cooperation. Jennifer said single fathers always fail eventually, that you'd be begging for help within a week. Well, she was wrong about that, wasn't she? Tyler appeared in the doorway, walking slowly but steadily after his X-ray appointment. He looked from me to James, clearly sensing the tension in the room, then focused on the legal papers scattered across his bedside table. Uncle James, are those the papers that would make Grandma and Grandpa my guardians, instead of Dad? He asked with the directness that children sometimes display when adults think they haven't been paying attention. James looked stunned that Tyler had overheard and understood our conversation. It's just temporary, Tyler, just until your insurance situation gets sorted out. But Dad's insurance from his job covers me too, Tyler replied, matter-of-factly. I heard him talking to the billing lady yesterday about how both insurance plans would cover everything. So why would we need temporary guardians? From the mouths of babes. Tyler's innocent question revealed the final layer of deception. There had never been any real insurance crisis requiring emergency custody transfers. Robert's condition hadn't actually threatened Tyler's coverage continuity because my own employer-provided plan had been secondary coverage all along. The entire emergency was manufactured to pressure me into signing documents that would give Jennifer legal control over Tyler, regardless of reconciliation. James left without another word, taking his briefcase and custody papers with him. Tyler climbed carefully back into his bed, favoring his healing arm, and looked at me with those serious green eyes that always seemed older than his 11 years. Dad, are we ever going to see them again, the family, I mean? I don't know, buddy. Would you want to? Not really, he said thoughtfully. Real families don't abandon kids in hospitals. I learned that from watching how the other patients' families acted all week. Sometimes, children understand complicated situations with clarity that adults spend years trying to achieve. Tyler had observed genuine family behavior in the pediatric ward and recognized that what we'd experienced was something else entirely. You're absolutely right, I said, sitting down beside him and taking his hand. Real families show up when it matters. So what do we do now? Now we figure out who our real family is going to be. 3 months later, Tyler and I sat in our new apartment's living room, reviewing his first report card since the accident. Straight A's across the board, including an A+ in math that would have made his former grandparents proud if they'd been allowed to see it. But by then, my family's world had collapsed in ways they never could have anticipated when they chose financial security over their grandson's well-being. The recording device I'd purchased during those final days at the hospital had captured every conversation James, my parents, and eventually Jennifer herself had with me about the custody scheme. Their own words, preserved digitally, told a story of conspiracy, insurance fraud, and child exploitation that interested several different agencies once I decided to pursue justice, rather than simply walking away. Dad, Marcus is here, Tyler announced, opening the front door for my best friend, who had become something like an uncle over the past few months. Behind him came Rachel, the nurse who had comforted me during Tyler's intensive care crisis, and who had gradually become the most important person in both our lives. How did the final meeting go? Rachel asked, settling onto the couch beside Tyler and helping him organize his homework folders the way she'd been doing every Thursday evening since we'd started this new tradition. Better than I expected, I replied, showing them the legal documents that officially closed the investigation into Robert's company. The insurance fraud charges were dropped in exchange for full restitution payments, but the employment situation is exactly what we anticipated. The Department of Labor's investigation into Castellanos Construction had revealed financial irregularities far beyond the simple nepotism and manipulation that had affected my family. Robert's heart attack had apparently been triggered by discovering embezzlement within his accounting department money that Jennifer had been systematically siphoning to fund the lifestyle that kept my relatives loyal to her reconciliation scheme. When federal investigators started examining the company's books, they found evidence of inflated billing, phantom employees, and benefit fraud that implicated several management-level positions, including the ones my family members had been so desperate to protect. James lost his job, not because I refused reconciliation, but because his project reports had been falsified to justify bonus payments that Jennifer redirected to personal accounts. What about Patricia? Tyler asked. He'd developed a mature understanding of adult consequences over the past few months, perhaps. because he'd witnessed firsthand how actions create ripple effects that extend far beyond their intended targets. She lost her design position when Diana's boutiques filed for bankruptcy protection, I explained. Turns out that Jennifer's mother had been using company credit lines to cover personal gambling debts. When Robert's medical emergency froze their corporate accounts, the whole house of cards collapsed within 2 weeks. The beautiful irony was that their scheme to maintain financial stability by forcing my reconciliation had actually accelerated the very losses they'd been trying to prevent. By the time federal investigations concluded, my father had lost his consultant position. My parents faced eviction from company housing, and the vacation home access they'd prioritized over Tyler's hospital visits had vanished along with Robert's empire. "Have any of them tried to contact you since the legal stuff finished?" Marcus asked. "Mom called last week, asking if Tyler and I wanted to meet for dinner and work things out as a family," I said. "Apparently, she's ready to forgive me for being stubborn about the divorce, now that she understands how complicated the situation really was." Tyler rolled his eyes in a gesture that reminded me how much he'd matured since our accident. "Did you tell her that we already have a family dinner every Sunday with people who actually like us?" He was referring to our weekly gatherings with Marcus and Amy's family, along with Rachel's parents who lived nearby, and the neighbors who had become genuine friends during our recovery period. Our chosen family had grown organically around shared values and mutual support, rather than blood relationships and financial obligations. "I told her we'd think about it," I said, ruffling Tyler's hair affectionately. "But I also told her that any relationship going forward would need to be based on respect for our independence and Tyler's well-being, rather than attempts to control our personal decisions." "What did she say?" "She said that wasn't the kind of relationship she was interested in having." Tyler nodded solemnly, processing this final confirmation that his biological extended family had chosen conditional love over unconditional acceptance. At 12 years old, he'd learned lessons about loyalty and integrity that many adults never master. 6 months after our accident, Tyler's arm had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar that he wore like a badge of honor. He excelled in his new school, made friends easily, and showed no lasting trauma from either the crash or the family abandonment that followed. Children, I'd learned, are remarkably resilient when they feel secure in their primary relationships. Rachel and I had moved slowly and carefully, building a relationship based on friendship and shared values, rather than crisis bonding or rebound emotions. Tyler adored her, not as a replacement mother, but as someone who chose to love him without ulterior motives or conditional requirements. She brought stability, laughter, and genuine partnership to our lives in ways that felt natural rather than forced. Marcus helped me start an independent consulting business that flourished because clients valued competence and integrity over family connections and social networking. Working for myself meant freedom from the kind of employment manipulation that had controlled my relatives for years. Tyler learned about entrepreneurship, work ethic, and the satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful, rather than simply inheriting or being given opportunities through family favors. The life lesson that emerged from our ordeal was clearer than I could have imagined during those dark hospital days when I thought Tyler might not survive, and my family had abandoned us both. Real love shows up when it's needed, not when it's convenient. Authentic relationships survive disagreement and support independence, rather than demanding conformity. Family isn't defined by blood or marriage certificates, but by who chooses to stand beside you during the worst moments of your life. Tyler had learned that he could survive crisis, that recovery was possible even from devastating injuries, and that people who truly cared about his well-being would never use his pain as leverage for their own purposes. He'd also learned that sometimes the family you build is stronger and more reliable than the family you're born into. As we settled in for our Thursday evening routine of homework, dinner preparation, and family conversation with people who had chosen to love us unconditionally, I realized that Jennifer and my relatives had actually given us an unexpected gift. Their betrayal had forced us to discover our own strength build authentic relationships, and create a life based on genuine values, rather than inherited obligations. The drunk driver who hit us had changed our lives in 3 seconds of twisted metal and broken glass. But my family's response to that crisis had taught us something far more valuable than anything. We'd lost the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can do for them. Tyler looked up from his math homework pencil, poised over a particularly challenging problem. Dad, do you think they ever figured out that treating us badly didn't make us want to come back? I think they're still figuring that out, buddy. Well, it's too late now anyway, he said matter-of-factly, returning to his equations. We already found our real family. And we had. In hospital waiting rooms, and friends who drove 3 hours without being asked. In nurses who noticed when patients needed extra care, and neighbors who brought casseroles when they heard about accidents. In people who showed up during crises and stayed for celebrations. In relationships built on choice, rather than obligation support, rather than control love, rather than manipulation. The drunk driver had stolen 3 seconds of our lives on a Tuesday evening, but the family we'd built in response had given us something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that we could create our own happiness, define our own values, and surround ourselves with people who celebrated our independence rather than resenting it. If you've ever been through a family crisis that revealed who people really are beneath their public faces, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. How did you rebuild after discovering that people you trusted had ulterior motives? What did you learn about the difference between family by blood and family by choice? Please like this video if Tyler's story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and building authentic relationships, and share this with anyone who might be struggling with toxic family dynamics disguised as love and concern. Thank you for listening to our story and for being part of a community that understands the value of genuine support over conditional loyalty. I hope your own journey leads you to people who choose to love you exactly as you are, especially during the moments when you need them most.